Hi everybody and welcome to this week's live stream. We're going to talk about a really popular topic for this channel I'm really excited to get into today. So thank you all for being here live if you are. If you're watching the archive, great. I'm going to be putting some stuff in the description of the video after the live stream is no longer live. So if you're watching the archive, you should definitely reference some of the stuff I'm going to put in the description. If you're watching live, we are just going to get into it live. So hello everybody and welcome. Let me be checking in with the chat. So today, because we are doing more of a talking teaching topic, I'm just going to be sitting right here reading the chat right off of this same computer that I'm streaming on. So I will do my best to be checking in with all of you guys and taking your questions like we always do. So hello and welcome. So let's see. These live streams have been so fun doing these every week for the past however long it's been, 6 weeks now, that so many of us have been stuck at home. So I'm really glad I was able to bring this to you guys and that so many of you have been enjoying it. So if you are new to the channel, I am Emily and I play the cello. I focus on specifically the Baroque period. So I play on a historically, somewhat historically modified cello to be more like the cellos from the Baroque period. I have a master's degree in early music performance, so I know all about playing stylistically, and most of the videos here on my channel are early music videos, specifically played on period instruments. So that really is my main thing and something that I get asked so much about. I have a lot of information to share, so I wanted to do kind of like a basic overview. If you play classical music or you play a classical instrument and you want to get more into historical performance and playing this earlier repertoire in a historically informed fashion, that's what this is going to be all about. So welcome, and I'm going to be taking all relevant questions. I am for today going to be trying to stay just on this topic as much as possible. Sometimes I still take straggler questions, but just so that, especially for the people watching the archive who aren't here live, can really just get the info that this stream is intended for. So we're going to be going through my 5 things. I've got my list of 5 on my phone that I'm going to be going through. And after the stream, I am going to list those 5 in the description of the video. There's going to be more information in the description as well. So how is everybody doing on this fine Thursday? Feel free to say hi in the chat. Of course, if you are enjoying the stream, give it a thumbs up. Helps me, helps YouTube know that people are liking it, which is great. So if you are new to these live streams, especially here on the channel, we've done some fun stuff the past couple weeks. Last week was a stream all about 17th century repertoire for the solo cello. I loved going into that topic last week because the 17th century music really is my favorite. It's my favorite to play, it's my favorite to talk about, really to play mostly. But we had some good discussion about some of that repertoire last week, and I did say we're going to be doing a part 2 for the 17th century solo-based music. That'll probably be next week. Today wanted to switch it up and not do the same theme 2 weeks in a row, but we will have a part 2 for the 17th century repertoire. We have also done just some more kind of performance live streams where I've played solo cello music. I've played some duets with myself and kind of showed my method of how I do that in real time. What else do we have? We had a live stream all about social media and technology for classical musicians. And I'm very open to topics and suggestions too, so you can always leave them in a comment on any of my social media or here on YouTube of things you might want to see in the live stream. I love hearing about that. These live streams are supported by very generous donations every week, which is awesome. As you can see, the donation info is down below if you feel so inclined to donate. But those donations, they help support me, but I'm committed to bringing these streams to you free. One of the reasons I'm able to bring them to you free on YouTube is because of the supports of my patrons on Patreon, which I've had for years supporting this channel. So if you want to be on board to be more of an ongoing supporter, definitely check out my Patreon page. That's linked in the description of the video. It's patreon.com/EmilyPlaysCello. And then one-time donations are just as much appreciated too. And thank you so much for all my generous donors who've been so kind to me through this. It helps me a lot. It's helped me, continue bringing you guys great content every week and showing up for you every week. So just thank you all guys for the support. It's been awesome. And I love coming on here live every week now. So that's my intro. If you're new to performance practice at all, there's so much to dive into on my channel. The instructional videos playlist has pretty much all the videos that you'll need for these topics. So everything that we go over today, it's going to be kind of like a broad umbrella bullet point style way of going through this, but there's going to be a lot more information on my channel that you can use to learn more about this, and we're going to talk about additional sources after. But I wanted to kind of start from a very basic standpoint because so many people find my channel, they either play classical music already, they have an interest, and they want to start learning a little bit more about what we call historical performance. Sometimes we just use blanket term early music. Early music really includes everything, medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, early classical. So early music is an enormous umbrella. We use it sometimes when we want to refer to period instruments just because it's kind of assumed if you're talking about early music that you're going to be using a period instrument. Like nobody's playing like medieval music on like a modern piano. I mean, maybe everyone plays everything on a modern piano these days, but for the most part, the earlier repertoire, we're playing it on, more similar early instruments. Historical performance is maybe the more technical term. Period instruments, period performance. There's a lot of words for what we're going to be talking about today. But why don't we just get into it? So I'm going to go through these points, and again, you can throw your questions in the chat at any time. I'm going to be checking back, as much as I can with the chat. So I hope this is some good information for all these classical music people who want to know a little more about playing in the Baroque style specifically. And again, Baroque music, 1600 to 1750, is really what we're focused on here today for this discussion. So my number one, what did I call this? 5 things? Yes, 5 things to know. My number one thing, I could have said points, I might even change the word. Right now it's 5 things. So the first thing on our list, number 1, is all notes are not created equal. This is very important to know for playing Baroque music and playing in a historical style. And everything that I'm going to talk about are really like my most useful, meaningful tips. It's not going to be like which brand of gut strings, though I will answer that question if people want to know. But it's really about, you want to get started in this, where should you really begin? So point number 1, all notes are not created equal. So in the Baroque period, one of the most important principles was the principle of strong and weak. And it's a little bit counterintuitive to how we study classical music now, because so much of what we do in technique on an instrument is about making everything even. When we're working on string instruments, for example, we're always trying to get our up bows to be just as strong as our down bows, right? We're trying to make everything as even and streamlined as possible. But in the Baroque period, that was not how they approached music or technique. So it's really important to start shedding that habit of trying to equalize everything and start really wrapping your mind around the idea that all notes are not created equal, and there's a very elaborate system in place for knowing which notes should be strong and which should be weak. But the basic principle of strong-weak, which again, I do have a video here on my channel about the strong-weak principle, so again, there's much more for you to watch if any of these pointers kind of get you going and make you curious. But the idea behind strong-weak is that there was sort of like a natural, just like the push and the pull of the bow, there was kind of a natural sort of ebb. Everything was not all notes the same. So the first most basic rule of the strong weak would be certain things like the down bow was going to be stronger than the up bow. So a natural bow stroke for any stringed instruments during the Baroque period, we would have a stronger down bow and a weaker up bow. So it was kind of built into the mechanics, and I of course talk about my Baroque bow versus my modern bow a lot, and it's very relevant to strong weak, so I will do it just briefly right now. So here's my modern bow, and there we go. We can see that the stick curves in towards the hair. Oops, sorry, there we go. We got a pretty heavy squared off frog. And here is my 18th century model of a Baroque bow. And we can see here that the tip is light and pointy, and that the stick curves away from the hair, especially if I were to tighten it. It's pretty loose right now. So this bow naturally is going to have a lighter up bow because there is not as much weight, and because naturally the curve of the bow makes a decay by the time we get out here further in the bow. So where the modern bow is built to be even, we're going to go down bow, and then we've got this weight here on the tip to go up bow at the same strength. This lighter Baroque bow is made to go strong on the down bow and light on the up bow. So it really was built into the mechanics of the gear. That being said, you can know all these principles and do it on your modern instrument, and that is something I'm going to talk a lot about today. while it's great to be playing on gut strings and to get a Baroque bow or even get an actual period instrument to play on, that's wonderful, but you shouldn't feel limited if that's not available to you. There's a lot you can do with your modern equipment. And people who are trained in historical performance sometimes will get weird hybrid gigs where they want us to play on steel strings and modern instruments, but they want it to be in the Baroque style. So we have to find ways to incorporate these rules and principles regardless of the gear that we're using. So you can take a bow like this that's heavy at the tip that wants to give a stronger up bow and still play light on your up bows. You have to overcompensate a little, but it is possible. And if the goal is really to play the music as well as possible in the most informed, educated way, you can do it on any gear. And I really do want to hammer home that the point here is about playing the music in the way that does the music the most justice. You know, again, this is never, and I've said this on many streams, I'm probably going to repeat myself a lot today because I've talked about these topics before, but it's never about doing it the right way because that's right. It's about understanding the context with which the composers were working in, the actual sounds that were available to the composers when they were writing this music. So we're just actually getting a better understanding of where the composers were coming from rather than kind of bastardizing the music and putting it in our 20th or 21st century aesthetic and trying to make sense of it. So just know this is not about blindly following rules. It's about understanding context and using that to make a more enriching, beautiful musical performance. So knowing that all notes are not created equal is very, very important starting point for all this music. And this, of course, applies to every instrument playing in the Baroque period. So the bow and the down bows and up bows are kind of a good basic way to start talking about the idea of the strong, weak principle and all notes not being created equal. But another thing is understanding beat hierarchy in a measure. So for example, if we're in a 4/4, every beat of that 4/4 does not have the same emphasis. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4. Like we know if nothing else, we have a 1, 2, 3, 4. Like we're strongest on 1 and 3. And we're weaker on 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that already is going to inform our strong weak. So if we're just playing quarter notes in a 4/4, luckily our bow is built into the strong weak. So we're naturally, if we're just doing a regular down, up, down bowing, and I'm going to use bowing examples, but again, this doesn't only apply to string instruments. Naturally, the 2 and the 4 are going to fall on up bow strokes. So those are going to already be weaker because they're an up bow stroke. So that's also another way of understanding this strong weak principle was built into the music in a lot of different ways. It was built in the time signature and the rhythms, which very strongly corresponded to the dances of the time. It was built into the equipment that they were playing on. So it has to go against some of our modern knowledge, but it's very much just a part of the music and the culture. And so the more you kind of understand how it works, the easier it will be to apply to all of your repertoire from this period. So beat hierarchy is another place we see the strong weak. So in a 4/4, that would mean the 1 and the 3 are the stronger beats, but the 3 is still weaker than the 1. The 1 is the strongest, 1. Then 2 is less. 3 is more than 2, but not as much as 1, and then 4 is the weakest. That's kind of our basic hierarchy for a 4/4. For a 3/4, we're going to have the strongest on beat 1 again, and 2 and 3 are going to each get weaker. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So that's our beat hierarchy. That's why we often do a down, up, up bowing in a 3/4. So right away, something you want to do when you're starting out trying to play in a more Baroque style way is making sure you're not putting any accents on weak beats or weak notes or weak strokes. So, of course, there are always going to be exceptions to every rule. That's how rules work. But you have to know the rule first before you start making exceptions. So know that the rule is that in a 4/4, your 2 and your 4 are your weak beats. In a 3/4, your 2 and your 3 are weak beats. And your down bow stroke is generally going to be your strong stroke. Then there are also strong and weak principles that apply based on harmony. So, and we're going to get into harmony a little bit more, but I'll just speak to the all notes are not created equal point here, that in general, a consonant interval or something that is like not dissonance. Consonance and dissonance has to do with music theory, and we're not going to go into a music theory lesson, but I'm assuming you're familiar with the terms consonant and dissonant. If something is dissonant, that actually would be a stronger note, because harmony was one of the main ways that they chose to be expressive in the Baroque period. So when we had a clashing dissonant harmony, that was something that we wanted to be strong, whereas a consonant harmony, which is oftentimes like a resolution, those would be weak. So we would actually build the tension on something like dominant chords or more dissonant chords, and then we would let the resolutions be the weaker side. So of course this is going to start to maybe sometimes interfere with a strong beat and a weak beat. Like, what do you do when you get a strong harmony but it's on a weak beat? And that's where you start to get into exceptions, and that's where, really playing a lot of music, playing with a lot of people, studying a lot, listening to a lot of recordings, that's where you really have to just open up your mind and start understanding where you're going to be making exceptions. But again, we want to know the rules first. So my first tip to know is that all notes are not created equal based on the strong-weak principle. So now let us get into number 2, which kind of segues nicely into what I was just talking about. So thing number 2 for playing Baroque music historically informed fashion is start from the bottom up. So Baroque music was composed from the basso continuo bass line first. So the music was composed bottom up, which is different than how we think of a lot of things, especially in modern day. We think of melodies first, but the basso continuo, which is the bass line in Baroque music, was not only the bass line, it was also the harmonic information. So all of the chord changes and the harmonies were all written there in the basso continuo. And if you are a little curious about basso continuo, I have a great video with my friend Dylan, who's a harpsichord player, explaining a little bit about playing basso continuo on the harpsichord or on a keyboard instrument. There is a lot to know about basso continuo. It's very elaborate, and a lot of times people who don't play chordal instruments or keyboard instruments don't know all the rules necessarily. It's great to study it and learn about it. You can get by without knowing everything. But basically, our bass line in Baroque music is going to contain everything we need to know with the harmony in the music. And like I said, because harmony was one of the most expressive tools they had in the Baroque period, they were not doing really dramatic, like dynamics were not written in the music as much. So really crazy, like writing fortissimo, that was like not a thing that they did back then. So the way that they got more extreme, evocative textures was through harmony, and the harmony was always indicated in the basso continuo part. So even if you play like a violin or a flute, or you play a higher instrument, you want to know your bass line. That is the most important thing you could do. It's going to inform how you play every note of your solo part for the most part, because that bass line and that harmony and that foundation is giving all the context to your melody. And your melody would not exist without that foundation there. Your melody is a blossom from that foundation of the basso continuo. So what I would suggest for people starting out, if you're playing like a Baroque sonata or something that does have accompaniment, play along with accompaniment if possible, if you can get an actual accompanist. If you can't, if you can find a recording of like just the bottom part, or even play along with another recording. I know that's not always ideal, but knowing that bass line and that bottom part is going to inform everything about your solo part, and that is how the composers were really thinking of it too. So no being in your tunnel vision soloist view, I only know my part. You're not going to know even which notes are dissonant in your part without the foundation of the harmony and the bass line below you. So always start from the bottom up when you're studying your music. I mean, if you want to learn your part, fine, but you're going to learn it with so much more knowledge if you start by knowing the bass line and knowing the continuo first. Even if it's just listening to a recording and kind of paying attention to that bass line a couple times, so that you can then have it in your ear when you're practicing your part. But you need that foundation. Your part does not have context without it. So that's really important to know, because we tend to kind of just think about our parts and not the larger picture. But in Baroque music, we gotta know what's going on in our basso continuo, at least to our ear. Even if we can't explain every figured bass symbol, we should know to our ear when we're playing dissonances, when we have a more consonant interval, stuff like that. Let me check in here with the chat. What's the best school for Baroque musicians? So obviously I only went to the schools I went to. It's not like I got to be a student at every school, so I can't give like a full answer. There's luckily a lot of good Baroque programs now, or at least a small handful of good ones in the States. Indiana University, like you mentioned, is definitely one of the go-to ones. There's a great faculty there. It's a great school from what I've heard. The biggest trade-offs I think with choosing a school to study early music is knowing what city you're going to be in, because most people studying early music full-time or historical performance, you're probably doing a master's or an advanced degree beyond your bachelor's. So that means you're going to be probably trying to gig and freelance at the same time while you're in school. So it's worth knowing, how much that matters to you, because if you're in a more rural area like Indiana, it's going to be very different in terms of the gig scene than a major city, like if you were in Boston or San Francisco. I did my master's in Boston. There's a thriving early music scene there, so I was able to do a lot of really interesting, rewarding, fun gigs while I was doing my master's. And then, of course, as soon as I was done with my master's, I was already in Boston, so it was easy to get gigs and performances, and I really knew my way around. So that's just something to consider, is like, what do you plan on staying in that same city after your degree? And if so, what's the professional climate like there? But at this point, every school that offers any kind of historical degree has a good department. You can't really offer a degree specializing in that if you don't have decent faculty covering kind of all the important areas. I studied at the Longy School of Music, which is owned by Bard College now, and that's in Boston. It's a very small school, mostly like graduate students, and I don't know what the numbers are now. It was like 200 students when I was there for my master's. So it was a small program, but I got a lot of individualized, like I had my teacher's full attention, like I could really get help for everything that I needed. And the program was great in that it dealt with a lot of even earlier stuff than what I was doing. I got to hear my singer friends do medieval and Renaissance stuff all the time. Some historical performance programs are more geared just towards like Baroque and high Baroque, so you don't get as much of the earlier medieval, Renaissance, early Baroque stuff, and I really liked the earlier stuff. So I liked being in a program that had classes and information on that stuff. Sometimes it's really just like Baroque and early classical. So depending on your own interest, and it's good at looking at what kind of classes are offered, just stuff like that, to feel like you're really going to get all your bases covered in whatever you're trying to do in historical performance. Okay, so let's keep going with the list for now, but I will keep checking in with you guys. This seems like a really specific style of music. It definitely is pretty specific, but it's about 150 years of music. So, it's like some people, like, we lump classical music, like, oh yeah, all classical music is the same. Like, classical music contains, and I've done my quotes a million times today, I always have certain streams where the hand quotes come out constantly, and clearly today is one of them. But classical music is like 500 years of music. So you can imagine in a couple hundred years from now, they're going to be looking at music like from the 1950s and then from like 2020, and they're going to be like, it all sounds the same. And it's like, to us now, it's like, excuse me? Like, you think that, I won't even make examples, but it's all about context. But anyway, yes, playing Baroque music is a specific style, but there's so much music, and I pretty much made my whole classical career all around that. So there's a lot of music there to be discovered if you do want to fully dive into it. Okay, so number 3 for playing Baroque music is gear is great, but not essential. So I kind of talked about this at the beginning, but don't obsess about what equipment you have available to you so much to the point that you kind of hold yourself back from exploring this playing style, because like I said, you can do it on really any equipment. It's great if you can have gut strings. People ask me about getting like an inexpensive Baroque cello all the time, and this could apply for any Baroque instrument really. I'll speak specifically to strings though for this one point. Putting gut strings on a modern instrument already gets you miles closer to what it's like to play on a historical instrument, because our strings are such a big part of that. Not everybody has a spare modern instrument that they can put gut strings on, but it's great to know that you don't need a Baroque cello specifically. I mean, even I play on a replica, and it's not even, every single part of it is not exactly 18th century replica, but it has gut strings, it has a short fingerboard, it has a simple tailpiece, it has no end pin, equipment stuff. which if you're actually interested in the difference between Baroque and modern string instruments and you don't know much about the difference, there's another great video, I think it's called About Baroque Instruments, on my channel here in the instructional videos playlist, that outlines all the constructional differences. I'm not going to do that in today's video. So you can get an idea of what the differences are with a Baroque to a modern string instrument, but you can make your modern instrument work for you if you want to explore this style. Putting gut strings on is great, but even if you can't put gut strings on, if you want to tune down to 415, great, but you also don't need that. Like, understand, to play great Baroque music and to play in a historically informed fashion like we're talking about, it's not just about the gut strings and tune it down to 415 and here's a Baroque bow and now you're playing Baroque music. And in fact, when you start to kind of get into this world professionally, you see a lot of modern players who do all of those steps, like they get all the gear, but they don't do enough study of actually how to perform their repertoire. So even with all this special historical equipment, they still kind of sound like they're playing like a modern player because so much of it is about the playing style. So while the instrument and the tuning and all of that helps get you closer, and it can also help kind of reset your ear to a new aesthetic, which can be helpful when you're trying to play differently, that's not what's going to make you sound like you really know this repertoire. What's going to make you sound like you know this repertoire is studying it and learning these principles, immersing yourself in the language, really making yourself knowledgeable about the playing style and practicing these techniques. That's what's going to make you sound historical, not just getting all the equipment and stuff. So again, the equipment is great, but don't let that hold you back from exploring, and don't think that if you just retune and put gut strings on and grab a Baroque bow that you're going to be a historical mastermind. You need to know how to use this equipment and know how to actually do some of these phrasing and style things, like the very first point that I made, which was about the strong-weak principle. If you don't have a great understanding of the strong-weak principle, it does not matter what kind of cello or what kind of violin you're playing on. Like, these are things you want to know regardless. That was number 3, about gear is great but not essential. Let me look at these questions. Favorite cello suite recordings, I really don't have I'm not like a big favorites person, but I would actually say the cello suite recordings that like most impacted me are my former teacher, Phoebe Karai. I actually heard her Bach cello suite recordings before I met her. And she is, besides being like a full-time Baroque player, like really knows her stuff and really plays in the style, she's wildly creative and artistic, so her Bach recordings really spoke to me. So Phoebe Karai, Carrai, their recordings available everywhere. Definitely, I would say my favorite. And then I was lucky enough to study with her for 3 years after that. Does my Baroque cello have the modern bridge height? It does not. Which cello? So I did have a custom bridge built for this cello. I don't know how well we can see it without me like smacking it into something. And because this is technically, the body of this cello is a modern cello, I'd have to ask my luthier who built this for me exactly, but I'm pretty sure it qualifies as a Baroque bridge. He still has to work with the sound post and everything in my modern instrument, but pretty sure it's a Baroque bridge. It's lower and better suited for this. So this things on my Baroque cello, I don't have the fine tuners, I don't have an end pin. There we go. I have a shorter fingerboard, so things like that are definitely, no one would know my cello was built a modern cello unless I told them. It's down to like the very nitty-gritty specifics. But I bring that up just to say, like, don't get too caught in the weeds about equipment and gear. It's not as important as just playing the music in a way that shows that you understand the music. Okay, we just did thing number 3, and we're actually kind of flying through these, but that's good. So point number 4 is open your ear, and this is going to be mostly with regards to tuning. So tuning is a really big discussion in historical performance, and I'm just going to scratch on the surface of it. It's a very hard thing to talk about abstractly, which is why the point of this is open your ears. So And the people who can talk the most about temperaments, which is what I'm going to explain a little bit about, are really keyboard players who have to tune harpsichords and organs to specific temperaments. It's the keyboard players who really know the most about temperament. So I'm not going to claim to be a temperament scholar or anything like that. I'm just going to give you guys kind of a basic intro about tuning in the Baroque style. So we play in a modern day, modern life, we play in what's called equal temperament, and that means that every half step is the same amount of sense. So when you go to a piano and you go up and you touch every key, the interval of those half steps, and we measure pitch and sense, the intervals of those half steps are exactly the same in equal temperament. But that is not how they played back in the Baroque period and all the other time periods. They did what was called, I guess you could call, tempered tuning. So it was based more on getting pure intervals. And to try to abstractly explain a pure interval, it's when like the sound waves actually lock in. You can hear a real difference when you hear a pure interval. So that's like if you're in a big cathedral and you have two people singing or two people playing notes, when you hit that kind of like perfect tuning, the vibration of the sound is just different. And so that's kind of how they did their tuning, was sort of more with locking in certain intervals to have a pure sound, rather than everything being an equal half step, which is a much more mathematical, mechanical approach to tuning that actually makes everything out of tune in a sense, if we call purity the most in tune. So again, this is all very abstract talking about tuning, so I am going to boil this down in a more practical way to start applying. But basically, pure intervals would require us to take our major thirds and lower them a little bit from where they're at in equal temperament, and our minor thirds and raise them a little bit from where they're at, and that actually creates more of a pure sound. If you play a string instrument so you have no frets and you're free to like micro tune your pitches like this, you can use your open strings also to listen for purity of tuning. A lot of times what I like to do is, like on my cello, if I'm playing an F sharp or an F natural on the D string, so a 3 or a 2, I will check with my open A to listen for the purity there of the interval. So it's not just about recalibrating the A. Like many of us know, we change the A from 440 to 415, which is a half step lower, so all the pitches go a half step down. It's not just about that. It's actually about our thirds, our fifths, our octaves. How do those intervals really lock in with our tuning? So again, the best way to learn this is really playing with others and playing in situations where temperaments are established. So temperaments are names for different types of tuning that spoke to, different variations of how high or low certain thirds were. So some common tunings are mean tone, velati. Mean tone also has a couple of variants like quarter comma, 6 comma mean tone. So these temperaments had names. A lot of them were based on the cities that they were commonly used in during the Baroque period. You don't have to know all this stuff about temperaments. What I suggest, if you're getting used to playing in Baroque tuning, and especially if you're a very trained classical musician, you probably hear in equal temperament. Equal temperament is probably what you understand as in tune. So that's why this point is called open your ears, and you want to start being able to get yourself into a different sound world of a different tuning system. So the best way to do that is listen to a lot of historical period instrument recordings. So whether you're playing at A415 or 440, if it's a historical recording, like it's done by a group that identifies as a period instrument ensemble, they're going to be playing on gut strings, and they're going to be playing in some sort of tuning system that is not equal temperament. So the more that you can just listen to recordings that are not in equal temperament, your ear will start to kind of understand that sound world a little bit better. Another option you can do, and I've already suggested playing along with recordings before. I know it seems a little weird if you're like a trained musician to play along with a recording, but I think if you don't have other people playing early music around you, you don't have other musicians that you can learn from, using a recording is a very good tool that you can have. So even listening to pieces that you're studying yourself or other things you're familiar with, listening to period instrument recordings and realizing, oh wow, they really play that note a lot lower than what I was playing. Or you may, even if you have a really good ear and equal temperament, some of the stuff may sound out of tune to you. Again, the quotes, so many quotes today. But that's normal, and you just have to kind of get your ear into a different tuning system. So it's just letting the ear kind of open up and have a wider interpretation of what in tune means, and you can eventually start to sort of differentiate between, okay, this is modern and equal temperament, sounds like this. Now I'm playing this 18th or 17th century music and I'm moving towards a more mean tone type tuning. I'm going to play my major thirds lower, my minor thirds higher, stuff like that. So just start opening your ears to that world. Again, recordings are your best friend. I never suggest imitating a recording, and I think actually one of the best ways that we can open our ears is doing more passive listening. So one of the biggest things I did when I first started studying Baroque music was, at the time, this was ages ago, iTunes Radio had a Baroque music station, and I just had that on like 24/7 when I was doing anything. And many of those recordings that they played at the time, I mean, this was like 2007 or 8, many of those recordings were period instrument recordings. So I just had that aesthetic going on all the time in the background. It wasn't like I was sitting there reading the score along with a piece I was working on and making little observations. I was just opening my ear to the sound of tempered tuning all the time, so that when it came time to play my instrument, I was just a little bit more familiar with it, because so much of it is about your ear. So I suggest listening to a lot of period instrument recordings. Again, it can be passive listening, just to get your ear used to non-equal temperament. Okay. Questions. Do you have any advice for playing Baroque music on a modern cello setup? Should we try to emulate Baroque playing, or do you think we should make different decisions? So it depends what your performance is for, of course. I think pretty much any time, for me personally, even if I'm playing on a modern instrument, if I'm playing Baroque music, I'm going to play it in a stylistic way. That's the only way I want to play this music. So I don't think you have to make different decisions at all. I think you can try to apply as many historical, pieces of knowledge to your playing, even on a modern instrument. So I don't know if you tuned in late. At the beginning of the stream, I was showing my modern bow and my Baroque bow, but I was talking about how if you only have a modern bow, you can still try to simulate what the Baroque bow would do by having lighter up bows and stronger down bows, rather than trying to make your up bows equal to your down bows. So things like that you can do on your modern instrument right away. Same with tuning. You can play in a tempered tuning on a steel string. You can play your thirds, your major thirds lower, your minor thirds higher. So you can absolutely be doing stylistic stuff on your modern instrument. It's just a little bit harder. That's just the reality. When you go and finally use a Baroque bow for the first time, you'll be like, oh wow, it's so much easier to do these articulations. It's so much easier to have a light up bow. Of course it'll be easier if you have the gear. But if you don't, you can still work with the style and make it work on your modern instrument. Again, I've had to play my modern instrument. You can take the end pin out also and work on holding the cello without an end pin. I have a video explaining how to do that on my channel too. So you can do a lot with your modern instrument, and I really encourage that, just because I don't want people to feel limited, like they can't explore something that they want to explore just because they don't have the equipment. I'm 2 years from going to college and I want to study historical performance, but I currently study modern music in the conservatory. What was your experience with that? So I was a modern cello major for my undergrad, because most people for their undergrad have to just study regular modern instrument. For me personally, I knew by my junior year that I just only wanted to do historical performance. I also had a very rough time being a music major, because I only took private lessons for a year before my college auditions. So I had maybe about 2 years by the time I entered college. And most people who go off to music conservatory have 10 years of private lessons on their instrument. I had 1 or 2. So modern cello, I was already kind of behind and I wasn't catching up the way I needed to. And then I found Baroque cello and I was super in love with it. So I committed really fast and kind of threw modern cello to the wind. I wouldn't suggest that for everybody. It's just what worked for me given my background and my circumstances. So if you can do as much historical on top of your modern and make time for it, that's ideal, because of course you are there to study for your modern instrument and you don't want to throw that away. I still had to complete my degree. I got to give my recital on Baroque cello for my graduating recital. So that was a major win for me. But I still had to take orchestra rep class and play Don Juan and all those horrible excerpts on modern cello. That was like my worst nightmare. But I did have to do that for my degree requirements, even though I knew all I was going to be doing was playing continuo and I had to play Don Juan excerpts. But sometimes you just got to do it for school. So weigh out your options. Try to do both as much as you can. And, you know, every school environment is going to be different as to how, like, opening and, like, welcoming they are to that. You know, I don't know how segregated historical people are from modern people, but strive to do it without making any major sacrifices as much as you can. You don't want to, if it's undergrad, you want to feel like you've completed your modern degree, you know, and that's why a master's program exists for so many people, and why so many people do a master's program is they kind of do their undergrad and their modern, and then they get to spend their master's really going in deep on the historical stuff. So that's just kind of my 2 cents. It really depends on you and your school environment the most. Okay, so we did number 3. And thank you, Matthew, for your donation, because I'm looking at my phone. I am seeing donations coming in, so thank you so much for that. Thank you for anybody donating. You guys know I appreciate it so much. It really does help me during this time. So that was number 4 we just did. So we've got just 1 left. I'm going to take a drink of water. So let me just check in here. Okay. All right, so the 5th and final thing or tip is keep learning. So a big mistake, what's the famous quote? I should have looked it up before this. It's basically the principle of, like, when you know a little bit, you think you know everything, and not until you really know a lot do you realize you know nothing. So historical performance is the same deal. Don't think because you know, like, 2 rules or you learned a couple things that you're like a scholar on this now. There's so much to learn. This was a very rich time in musical history. There was a lot of music being written. There were a lot of instructional books being written, which we're going to talk about. There were, you know, this is like all of European music too. So what was going on in Italy is different than what was going on in France, is different than what was going on in Germany. So while all these rules basically do apply to all the repertoire, and there absolutely were lots of commonalities between all this music, there's always so much more to learn about playing in a historically informed way, whether it's just knowing, you know, what Vivaldi preferred. So when you're playing Vivaldi, doing certain things, or whatever it is. So it's very important to keep learning and keep expanding your mind to these topics. When you feel like you've mastered a couple of these things, go further, because there's always going to be more. So one of the things I wanted to do, and I actually already put these in the description of the video, but I will list some just here on the stream. So one of the most important things that we do as historical performers is we read treatises. Treatises are basically like method books from the time period. And thankfully, a lot of these treatises have been translated and put into somewhat modern language. Some of them haven't. Some of them haven't been translated, but most of the big go-to ones have been translated and are available either in book form, or some of them are even PDFs online for free. All of these names you can Google and research a little bit further and kind of decide, but these are some of the basic treatises that we use as sources to learn about, you know, playing in a historical style. And of course, if we're trying to study music history here, which is what this is, it's great to use modern, you know, pointers. Like my whole YouTube channel is a modern approach to this. But the whole idea of historical performance is we want to read this from the people in the time period. Reading the historical sources is really what gets us, you know, to fully understand this world. So here are some couple examples of some great treatises that you can look into if you feel like you've mastered all the points on my channel and you want to learn a little bit more, or you're just new to this and you like reading. These are some ones to check out. So yes. Isn't the flute? Yeah, so I'm going to talk about Quantz. So Quantz was a flute player, and he wrote a treatise called On Playing the Flute, but it actually includes things for every instrument that are fairly digestible and easy. The Quantz treatise is one that I started out with. I was introduced to it at the Oberlin Baroque Performance Institute. It's one of my personal favorites. It's readable, it's digestible, it's kind of funny. Some of these guys were like really quirky. So some of these are like pretty interesting reading. So Quants on Playing the Flute, if you happen to be a flute player, great, but you do not need to be a flute player for that one. Really great. Again, these are going to be listed in the description of the video, so you can just have a good, quick reading list. So Quants on Playing the Flute. Geminiani wrote The Art of Violin Playing. CPE Bach, which was one of Bach's sons. He has a keyboard treatise. And these are all translations. Most of these were not written in English, but Essay on the True Art of Playing Keyboard Instruments, that's CPE Bach. And then Muffat, who's kind of an earlier 17th century French, has a performance practice book as well. That's a really great resource for bowing in particular. So, and I think I listed a few others in the description of the video too. So those are kind of like your gateway treatises, and you really can't call yourself a historical performer until you've read a treatise or two. I mean, that's what really puts you in the seat of the time period and makes you... That's how you get the real historical musical instruction, is reading the books from history. So I really encourage anyone who wants to do this seriously to dive into these treatises. Like I said, some are available online for free. Some are just, books you can order on Amazon. So treatises are a very important part of studying Baroque music. So, and there's many, many more than the ones I listed. In fact, I do encourage people, if you're more familiar with historical performance and you have treatises that you think are really great resources, I'm not giving an exhaustive list of treatises right now, but I wanted to give some good, easy starter ones. So please leave comments on the video. You can say it in the chat, but a comment's even better because it'll stay there permanently. If you have recommendations of treatises for people to check out based on your instrument, or if it's good for all instruments, because historical reading is really what brings us into the real history. So, oh, hey, Jonathan, thanks for stopping by. Well, we're just about wrapping up anyway. So those were my 5 things, 5 tips. I don't know if I want to call it things or tips. To kind of get you started in the world of historical performance. So if you tuned in late, I'll just do a quick recap of what they were. I am going to, once the video is no longer live, like I said, I'm going to list them in the description of the video also. But so the tips were, tip 1, all notes are not created equal, understanding the strong weak principle and also the importance of harmonic context for every note. Tip 2, start from the bottom up, know your bass line and your basso continuo part, and understand how your solo part or whatever part you're playing fits in to the bass line, because music in the Baroque period was composed from the bottom up. Number 3, gear is great but not essential. So know what's available to you for historical gear if you want to explore that, but also know what you could potentially do if you do not have that gear available to you. There's so much you can do in playing style, in tuning, that you can do regardless of if you have a period instrument in your hands. And remember that the point of doing this is not, if it were just about playing on an old instrument, then anybody could do that. It's about actually how you're playing the music. So that is something you're in control of, much more so than just what instrument you're playing on. So know that you can give a more historically informed performance on a modern instrument than a modern player who's just handed old equipment but doesn't know how to use it properly. So gear is great but not essential. Number 4 is open your ear. So that's starting to understand different tuning systems beyond just equal temperament. So listening to great period instrument recordings, spending time, if you play a fretless instrument, really working on playing in a different tuning, opening up your ear to just a different sound from equal temperament. And then number 5, which we just did, was keep learning. And that is reading treatises, reading historical documents to further your knowledge of this repertoire and how to play it. So those were our 5 tips. Got another question here. Can you tell us a bit about financials when being a Baroque musician? I'm thinking about moving to the Netherlands for my undergrad, and I'm concerned about money because there is just so much. So I assume that you mean there's so much Baroque music in the Netherlands, because I know that's a great place for playing and performing Baroque music. It's a toss-up whether you want to be in a place that is more saturated with what you're doing, so therefore there's more opportunities and more stuff going on and potentially more audience members, or a place that's less saturated, but then you can really shine in the area of whatever it is that you're doing. I did my master's and then stayed freelancing 7 years after in Boston, which is one of the biggest early music cities in the country, if not the biggest. So I got to experience what it's like being in a saturated market for Baroque music. I would say it was mostly positive. It's definitely great for learning because there are a lot of other people playing period instruments that you can learn from, and that's one of the best ways to really learn playing in the style is playing with other people. So I learned a lot by being in an environment where there was so much early music going on. I wouldn't have traded that for anything. I was very grateful for that after being in Connecticut for my undergrad, and there was not much early music stuff going on. I mean, there's a little, but not much. So Boston was a real upgrade, and I learned a lot from all those people playing. But I will say, yeah, I mean, eventually, when I was out of school and just planning performances, it was like there were early music concerts going on every night of the week. So it was like you could go see an early music concert anytime. It wasn't really like a novelty. So concerts were not very well attended because I felt like there was a little bit too many of them. Whereas I feel like if there was not a lot going on and it was like only once a month was there some Baroque period instrument performance, that would have been way more appealing. I think it would have been way better attended. So, you know, the financials for being a freelance musician, classical of any kind, is difficult. It's just a complicated and challenging way to make a living, whether you're doing early music or not. In fact, I almost think the early music piece of it, it's kind of irrelevant. You're still putting your life together the way any classical musician would, you know, a combination of gigs, performances, teaching, and it's really about your inner resourcefulness and what makes you happy at the end of the day. So there are a lot of factors at play beyond just which city you decide to move to and kind of what your temperament is. And I don't mean tuning temperament, I mean personality temperament. Are you a go-getter, or do you like things to kind of already be established and you can just work really well with other people? Or are you someone who wants to start your own, you know, ensemble or your own concert series? It's like that's all stuff to factor in when you're choosing your city. You know, is there a lot of opportunity for that? Or are there a lot of opportunities that already exist that you want to capitalize on? You know, things like that. So I do think if you're going into a more saturated market, it's really important to be kind of like a networker. You know, if you're moving somewhere that there's already a lot of stuff going on that you potentially want to be involved in, you have to network with those people and meet them and make them like you and make them want to play with you. And if there are already people there doing what you're doing, you of course run the risk of potentially taking their work, and that's always a little complicated. So kind of, if you're going into a saturated thing, you either want to know exactly your own niche that you want to carve out, or you want to be ready to really network and connect with people. Sometimes you move to a place and like there's a booming scene, but there's a shortage of cellists or a shortage of keyboard players, and then it's like perfect because there's this need for it and there's a lot of people doing it, but there's a shortage of whatever it is that you do. So there's a lot of particulars at play. I wish I could give you just like a clear answer on that, but it is of course complicated. But I think, like I said, moving and living in a place that's more saturated for this music will be a great learning experience, if nothing else, because there'll be a lot of experienced players that you can learn from and play with. Can you post a brief list of recommended reading for historical performance? Yep, so I did say that. It's already in the description of the video. After this is no longer live, I'm going to be adding even more information to the video description, but right now the reading list is already there because I knew that was going to be something people wanted. So I listed some off, but just go check in the description of the video and there should be a recommended reading list. And if not, there will be shortly. It'll be up after the stream is over. So everyone always needs a violist. That's very true. If you play viola, you're a little luckier than the rest of us. I mean, I shouldn't say that. You get a lot of viola jokes too. Oh yeah, Leopold Mozart. Did I mention? I don't think I mentioned him out loud, but he should be in the reading list. Hi, Oliver. But you know what I will say from every single person because I posted on my personal Facebook asking for recommendations of treatises to suggest for this live stream. And like I said, they are listed. But I think that early music people, when they're making these suggestions for beginners or new people, should get out of the habit of just saying the composer name. Quantz. It's like, remember that these people are beginners. It's like, Quantz, who is Quantz, what is Quantz, where do I go for Quantz? Like, let's name these treatises with their names and then say the name of the people that said them. I'm just saying that because so many people gave me recommendations and literally just said the last name of the composer. And it's like, I know we're all used to talking that way in music school, in the music school walls, but we're trying to make this accessible for everybody. So in the reading list down there, you will see the names of the treatises, which again, sometimes the names change because they're all translations. Almost none of these were written in English. Some of them were, but not all. So their translations, sometimes we'll get different wordings of the names of these treatises. But if you put in the name of the treatise with the name of the composer who wrote it, you will find information on these treatises. And I Googled them all myself to make sure that results do come up when you Google them. Okay. So we are about ready to wrap up here, so definitely get in your final questions. I'm glad you guys like this. Like I've said, I've talked about a lot of these topics on the channel before, but they're kind of scattered all about, so I thought it would be nice to just like make a boom 5 points list here. Granted, if I didn't do it in a live stream, it would be even shorter to watch, but I think the information is still there. So, yeah, I guess I'll just do my wrap up. I will, if any other questions get thrown in, I will answer them, but... So I'm doing these live streams every week now, every Thursday here on my YouTube channel. I moved to 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern for now. This is the time. I always announce the morning of on my social media at Emily Plays Cello what the stream's going to be about for that day. Usually the morning of is when I announce. Though I think next week, most likely, we will do the part 2 of the 17th century solo bass music, which we did last week was part 1. And I am always open to suggestions and ideas. Of course, I always do Q&A on the live streams. But if there's something that you would love to see like a whole live stream about as a topic, I'd love to hear your ideas. My patrons on Patreon are my great supporters. They're the backbone of this YouTube channel. So if you're interested in my Patreon, definitely check that out. But thank you so much for everyone who gives the one-time donations live on the stream. It means so much to me. It shows me the value of these streams. It really does. I know obviously everything does not come down to a dollar amount, but when someone is so moved to give a dollar amount, it does show to me what the value of these streams are. So thank you guys so much, everybody who donates. And if you don't have the means to donate, of course, there's no pressure. Just liking the video and subscribing to my channel is a great support to me. So thank you for doing that. Ken mentions that Rachel Barton Pine, who I've seen live a couple times, and I saw her live when I was in high school. I don't even know if she was doing historical performance at that time, but I know she eventually started doing Baroque playing, is talking about collecting some information from treatises. That would be really cool. Yeah, so Oliver mentions that certain treatises are good for all sorts of instruments, whereas others are very specific. So hopefully it'll be obvious in the title of some of them, or like say what instrument they're for. But like I mentioned about quants, it says on playing the flute, but much of it applies to all instruments. There's a lot of great information in there. So anything else? Thanks, Oliver. Oliver's awesome. We have some videos on my channel, at least one of us playing a Marcello sonata. Oliver and I went to school together. He's a Baroque cellist, and he's amazing, and I love accompanying him, and it will happen again one day. But in the meantime, you guys can watch us play Marcello on my channel. We performed one of those sonatas with Oliver on the solo part. All right, so that is it for today's live stream. This was a really fun, interesting discussion. I hope it was helpful. As always, you can leave your questions in the comments if you have any remaining. And tune in next week for whatever we do. I'm trying to do a mix of performing, like live streams where I'm kind of casually playing and doing the Q&A, and then live streams where I'm doing more kind of teaching and talking while doing the Q&A. So trying to balance the two. I was doing like not a lot of playing for a while, and then I brought back the playing because everybody wanted it, so trying to keep it all in balance. But thank you guys so much for watching. Of course, link up on my social media to stay up on everything I'm doing, though the live streams every week are the main thing that I'm doing right now for all this stuff. I was also going to say, if you play early or Baroque music, classical music, and you want to be featured here on my YouTube channel, I do feature other people who play this repertoire, and I love to do that because I've got such a thriving audience here that loves this music, and I want to spread the wealth. If you're trying to build your YouTube channel or your social media following, I would love to feature you. So if you're interested in that, you can go to you can go to emilyplayscello.com/collaborators, and there's a very simple form to fill out if you want to have your video featured, and I can even help you. I can do the audio mixing, stuff like that. And if you're just getting started with recording yourself and you're trying to figure out how to make the audio sound good, you should definitely check out my GarageBand tutorial. It's very beginner friendly for people who are just starting to record themselves and maybe they don't have like a really nice space to record in and it doesn't sound that good. It basically shows you how to use compression, reverb, and EQ to make your stuff just sound nicer without doing anything too complicated, just using, free GarageBand software. I hope that wasn't too loud. I just smacked my phone on the table. So definitely check out my GarageBand tutorial. That's on my website too, emilyplayscello.com/tutorials. And then I will just catch you guys next week. So thank you all so much for watching. And I'll see you next time. Bye.